Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me is Phil Mackintosh, Chief Economist at Nasdaq. Phil, it's great to see you as always, and let's get right into this. Stocks finished at record highs last week. In fact, this Monday morning, we see the Nasdaq hit an intraday high. But there's a lot to watch this week with the unofficial start of earnings and a number of macro outliers. What are you watching this week that could impact markets?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as you said, earnings season starts this week, and so we're going to get details on whether companies have actually been increasing their profits in the last 3 months. And if we do, and the analysts' expectations is that we will see pretty strong earnings growth, that helps support valuations, which a lot of people have been questioning. Price earnings ratios have obviously been relatively high with the market hitting all-time highs, but if earnings can catch up, that'll help support the market. But we saw last week just how quickly sentiment can turn. A lot of people are looking at the spread of the Delta variant and what that's doing with Asia. A lot of countries are starting to introduce new lockdowns, new quarantines. Even in the US, we're starting to see cases increase. We're starting to see a more dramatic increase in the least vaccinated states. So that could potentially put a handbrake on the expansion that we're seeing and the expansion that the globe is starting to see as well. And on top of that, obviously, everyone's looking at rates. So last week, we saw a huge downdraft in 10-year interest rates, whether that's because people think that we won't have the inflation, because people aren't going to be spending as aggressively and the growth will be more controllable, or whether they think that's because the Fed will be able to keep things from becoming inflationary on the wage side. All really important things to watch. So although it's summer, there's still plenty going on.
So, Phil, this is kind of a narrative that's been in the market, certainly for 2021. As rates move, so does the Nasdaq 100. And we saw the Nasdaq 100 recover because yields were falling in the 10-year. Phil, is there a point where falling yields become bad news?
For stocks? I mean, potentially, because the reason that rates are falling has to be understood. And if the bond market is looking ahead and thinking, I don't think we're going to get such strong growth, I don't think we're going to have enough growth to push the inflation that everybody's been pricing in, then that in itself means growth is going to be slower. And so that's the risk, is that the bond market right now is pulling rates back down because their expectation in 10 years is we're going to have pretty slow growth for a long time. We're not going to have inflation because of that, but also companies are going to have slower growth as well. And that's where the growth of the company's earnings might slow down too.
And just to go back to earnings for a moment to wrap up here, do you expect this quarter to be strong? Because anecdotally, as you had said, the US appears to be back to normal. Are analysts actually building this into their expectations?
Yeah, the expectation for this quarter is really strong. So, what you've been seeing with a lot of the states going back to normal, really, with the services sector has been growing, the employment, the jobs out there has been really strong. This will kind of be where the rubber hits the road, really, won't it? You've seen a lot of input price inflation. You've seen wage price inflation starting to come through some of the data. Will that squeeze margins, or will the growth in all the services sector, which we know is much bigger than the manufacturing sector, actually mean that the earnings are picking up and we're going to see a really strong increase in earnings? So the expectations right now are for really strong gains.
All right, Phil, appreciate the insight as always. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.